Hello everyone, it's GigaBeef here, and today we're looking at the fresh buffs for the SA58 and the MCX from this week, starting right here with the SA58, or the FAL as it's referred to sometimes. This has been taken from 277 base recoil down to 250, which is a 10% improvement, and the 34 base ergo has moved up to 39, an increase of 5. As usual, these recoil buffs refer to when there are no attachments on the gun at all, so it's just the naked lower section as stripped down as the game will let you take it. This means that any build that you might have had before is now better by 10%, i.e. the recoil gains get less as your builds get more meta. So to start with, let's use the SA58 lower on mechanic. This has just got nothing on it at all, so we can see the base 250 recoil here. Now in terms of this, let's start off right with the barrel, the 21 inch, which is the lowest recoil, and onto that we're going to add the long CASV FAL handguard. Onto that, we're going to use the Ultor 5-inch rail, and as usual, we will add the RK2, which is the minimum recoil vertical foregrip that you can get access to. As for muzzles, we'll go in here and use the QDC 762 muzzle brake kit. This is by far the lowest recoil between this and the QDC suppressor itself, and although these do cost 75k, they are very much the meta. They're best for recoil, and they're also good for ergo too within this particular caliber. Next up, we have a couple of ergo pointers, the AG FAL pistol grip for 13, and the Extreme Duty dust cover, which is this one. We'll add that on there. And then in terms of stocks, this is clearly very important. We're going to add the SA58 adapter. Onto that, we will add the MT crosshair. This isn't used very often because it's quest locked to quite a high level and also gives you negative ergonomics, which is why people tend not to use this, even though it does give you the minimum recoil out of all of these buffer tubes. We'll use that just for the time being, and then in terms of stocks themselves, we'll add the PRS Gen 3, which again is a similar story. You don't get much ergo from it, but it does give you the maximum recoil reduction. As you can see here, this gets you to 52 vertical recoil and 5 ergonomics, which is really quite low. We haven't even added any sights or any mags or anything like that yet, so we're basically into 0 ergo territory no matter what. So if we want to optimize this build a little bit, from 52 recoil, we can make some small sacrifices to get a little bit better. The way that we're going to do this to start with is by looking at some better foregrips. The RK2 is just like way too low on ergonomics, it always is, just simply by virtue of the fact that it has -8, whereas all the others give you a positive. So let's look at the RK1, which is kind of the first sort of meta grip that people tend to use, because this gives you +2 ergo, but with -3 recoil. Then as the stock goes, we're going to change out the MT crosshair for the advanced tube, and instead of the stock, we're going to use the MOE SG. It doesn't really matter which color you use, and a rubber butt pad on top. So this now gets you to 27 ergonomics and 60 vertical recoil. So we've given up 8. We've actually gained so much ergonomics to make this gun maybe potentially usable. At this point, I think it's worth introducing the magazines. You can use this polymer SA58 mag, which is 20 rounds as only, and that loses you 2 ergo, which isn't too bad, but most people tend to use this 30 rounder. Like, the point of the SA58 is the ability to go on full auto, and with the 20 rounders, you are a little limited. So we're going to use that, and it's only the 6 difference between the best 20 rounder. So this now gets you to 19 and 60, which is, it's not terrible. The other alternative is to change the foregrip over for something even more ergonomic, and my favourite for that is the SE5. This gives you 6 more ergo at the expense of losing 2 recoil. Now I personally, when we're down at these low levels of ergonomics, I actually think that the 2 recoil disadvantage is worth the 6 ergo, just because you can't really tell the difference between 60 and 62. But I think that the ergo, because it's a fixed amount of points, it can actually help a bit. Another alternative, if you want to swing it even more towards ergonomics at the expense of recoil, we have to remove the handguard and change over the barrel to the 16 inch, which is the one in the middle. Unfortunately with this one, you can't use that handguard that we used before. You have to use the shorter version of the CASV, and if we use that with the Ultor 5-inch and go back to the canted for start, and then just add our muzzle back on, this gets you to 33 ergonomics and 67 vertical recoil. So we're just increasing that ergo a bit and decreasing the recoil benefit that we get from the particular attachments. Replacing this with the SE5 will do exactly what you think it would, and we're going to get 6 more ergonomics here to 39 for an extra 2 worsening in recoil. So now we're at 39 and 70, which your mileage may vary. It depends on exactly what you're looking for out of this weapon. Now, one extra thing that you can do, because as we know that this gun does really want ergonomics quite badly as well as recoil, and it's tricky to balance the two. In terms of the scopes, if you're looking at a variable optic, you can use one of these. I don't see these particularly often, but this base, this Geissele Super Precision 30mm, gives you 0.5 when you use it. And then it also gives you another 0.5 for capping it off with the top. You have to use either the RMR mount, which gives you nothing, or one of these top rings, like the hemispheres. If you add that on, that actually gives you +1 for the mount, rather than negative, which the mounts usually do. And if you're using something like the Voodoo, which is -3, that means that the whole scope mount is now -2, rather than something worse than that. So that's actually one option if you just want to eke out the best that you can out of this gun. So next, let's have a look at the MCX, and we're going to look at Skier's version, and what we can do to start with is take off all the parts so we can see what the new recoil base is on this guy. Removing all of these, we can see that it is now 127. This used to be 132, so this is a 4% improvement. Not great, but it's a little bit. Building this back up from scratch, we're just going to add on the upper. It's the only one that you can do. And then barrels, we're going to add the longest version, and onto that, the gas block is the only one that you can add. In terms of compensators and suppressors, normally some people think that the QDC might be good, but this is the flash suppressor kit and not the muzzle brake that we saw on the FAL. So this way you have to go for the T-lock instead with the SRD QD, and onto that the 2-port muzzle brake, which is the best of these 3 little extra attachments. Handguards wise, we're going to use the longest one because that gives the most recoil reduction. Onto this CASV 6-inch and also the RK2 as per usual. Pistol grips, we're going to go with the Growl. The bolt, we only have one for the charging handle. And then on the stocks, for this, we're going to add an adapter again. This is pretty much the same formula as with the FAL actually. So we have the MT crosshair, and then onto that, we add the PRS Gen 3. And that gets us to 34 vertical recoil and 32 ergonomics. You can also, in theory, add on the Defiance front and back, which is the lightest one that gives you +1 ergo. And that gets you to 34 and 34 without any mags. Now again, this is basically overkill in terms of recoil and attachments, so what we're going to do is swap this out for instead the CQR. This is basically like the RK1 canted, except as you can see, it gives you 2 extra ergonomics, but almost no guns can take this. It's basically like the M4 and some of the AR-15 style weapons, and also then this MCX, which is kind of cool. That gets us to 46 and 36, so we're actually bumping the ergo up quite a lot here. And then in terms of the stocks, rather than the MT crosshair, we'll use the ARE, and then again, we're going to use the MOE of any color with a butt pad on the back. And that gets to 58 ergonomics and 38 vertical recoil. So we're only sacrificing 2 recoil points here for a lot of ergo, and we are suppressed, so this really isn't that bad. With such a high level of ergo, this actually is one of the reasons why we can end up using a drum mag on this gun, because that only takes you down to 42 and 38. Like, it's actually a usable weapon with the big drum, which is one of its redeeming features. So the real question, do these buffs actually change anything about the guns? Are the SA58 and the MCX worth another go? In all honesty, I think the answer is no. If you didn't like them before, I don't think you'll really like them now after the changes. Let's have a look at the Meta SA with 52 recoil with 0 ergo. Even there, the recoil is fairly extreme, and this simply comes down to the fact that its rate of fire is 700 RPM. The greatest strength of the weapon, i.e. its crazy low time to kill using some of the most powerful bullets in the game, as is often the case, still ends up becoming a disadvantage as it fires too fast to be controllable. Why would you use this weapon when you can instead run something like the Mutant, which has a much more controllable recoil profile for about the same price and also uses an extremely good cartridge, namely BP. Sure, the damage isn't as high, but this is more than made up for with the extra shots on target. Likewise, if using it primarily on semi-auto instead, you'd probably rather just use the M1A, the SR25 or the RSAS. Having full auto and semi is good, but we end up with kind of the worst of both in this situation. There is an argument for point fire only 0 ergo drum FAL usage with a laser and a flashlight, and it does carve a path in your enemies when it's used this way, but I think it's pretty situational. It only works on certain maps, in certain areas, and is very, very specialized, as opposed to the meta weapons that are basically good no matter where you are. As for the MCX, the recoil seems relatively decent now, worse than the Mutant but about the same as the RD, which is probably a fairer comparison. Both the RD and the MCX can take high capacity magazines without destroying the ergo characteristics of the gun, but clearly the MCX has a much higher fire rate with 800 versus the RD's 600. However, the main problem with the MCX still exists, the ammo. Due to 300 AP only being available at Workbench 3, it actually competes for your time with 7.62 BP, as well as M995 and M61. It's incredibly hard to get enough useful ammunition to want to utilise it for more than a raid or two, in part because the next best ammo, M62, is more akin to M856A1, which is not very competitive at the top levels of play, i.e. against Class 5 armour and higher. The regular 5.56 mix of M995 with M855A1 underneath is far more useful, with one purchasable and one craftable, and both cartridges are viable in their own right. Combined with how fast the MCX uses its ammunition, I think this is the main thing stopping it getting used more. It should be a really great weapon in theory, challenging some of the best guns, but the small recoil improvement here was never really the problem. So next up, go and check out my video on the RD704, which is one of my favourite endgame weapons this wipe, as you can get suppressed and a 50 round drum with BP without affecting the characteristics of the gun. Otherwise, as usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, hit all the buttons if you enjoyed the video, and as always, have fun in your raids.